Welcome to another episode of Digging Deeper. My name is Bradley Martin, and I am excited once again to lead us through. We are in the middle of a study on the book of Exodus. We are on chapters 17 and 18 today. So let me give you a quick refresher over where we've been over the last several weeks. If you want to go back and look at those, you can find those on any of our social media pages at One Church. You can see it on our Facebook or our YouTube, or you can find us in podcast form on any of your favorite podcasting platforms. But in the past few weeks, we've gone from at the beginning of Exodus, of course, the small family of Jacob moved down to Egypt because of the drought. Joseph, which is one of the sons, and I'm giving you the really skinny version right now just to make sure we're all on the same page. Joseph was one of the leaders in Egypt because of several circumstances. So please go back and look at that and listen to that. But after Joseph and all of the family of Jacob died, there arose a pharaoh that did not know the family of Joseph and did not consider them of any value, so they enslaved them. And so for years and years, the nation now of Israel, which was becoming a great nation, lived in bondage. They lived in slavery. And so God called a man named Moses out of Israel to go to Pharaoh and to demand that he let his people go. And through a series of plagues and other events there, after the final plague, which was the death of the firstborn, he let his people go. And so again, I'm skipping over a lot of details, so please go back and read through that, or listen through that, or watch, because all these details are very important. Every little thing that went on in that time was essential, and eventually led us to Christ. And so we discussed that in great detail about the Passover, about the Passover lamb, about the shedding of the blood of the Passover lamb, which would eventually become Christ, God himself in the form of Christ. And so that led us out of Egypt. And so from there, in the last few weeks, we left Egypt. We came upon the Red Sea. There was a great disturbance there because Egypt was following the nation to get them and bring them back. The sea was in front of them, and so God parted the sea. God allowed Israel to go over on dry ground, and once Israel got all the way through, Egypt was trying to follow them. God allowed the waters to come back and kill them all. So Egypt is no longer a threat to Israel. But that doesn't mean they're out of the woods, because the Bible taught us very specifically that God tested them by taking them the long route away, not the shortest route, which would have been through nations like Philistia, the Philistines, which in the coming books, we're not going to look at that in this particular study, but remember that the Philistines were a great enemy to Israel, especially in Judges, where we come upon when Saul becomes king and eventually David becomes king. That's where you see the Philistines more and more, but this was a nation there as well. Interesting to me that all this stuff takes place. You read in the Bible that God allowed these nations to inhabit the land, because if they did not, then wild beasts would come upon the land and it would be uninhabitable. And so there's a reason that God allows, and God puts things in here. And we also learned a couple weeks ago that one of the reasons, not only that God took them through a wilderness route, which was not the shortest route. He not only did that because they would see wars and want to turn back to Israel, but also he did that to test them. And that is a very interesting thing to think about. And it's things that it's a topic that continues to come along in Exodus. There are a lot of these instances that we're going to see today that are reoccurring. So last week we looked at the fact there was no water. The nation grumbled and wanted to go back. They talked about, hey, we had it better there. At least we had water. God provided water. There was no food. Again, the nation grumbled. The people grumbled against God, and God provided, even though they talked about, back in Egypt we had food. Now, what you see here is there is a forgetting of the total picture. They were so worried about their own, and let's just be honest. While we need water and we need food to survive, okay, and that's inarguable. I think I made up a word there. You can't argue that, but it's not instantaneous. It's not going through difficulties. It's not going through slavery or bondage or being forced to do things you don't want to do. These people were in Egypt enslaved. They were forced to labor. They were in conditions that would be almost unbearable. But yet when they got out of Egypt, they still had a little bit of Egypt in them because they kept seeing all the difficulties. And even though it was temporary and God provided, as we saw last week, they still remembered, hey, at least we had food. Now they forgot all about the torture. They forgot all about the difficulties and bondages and slavery and all that stuff that they had, being whipped and beaten because they were slaves. And so we oftentimes ourselves do the same thing. And one of the reasons I believe that God does this, and He allows us to go through trials. We're looking at the book of James right now on Sunday mornings. Pastor Joel is preaching through the book of James, and it talks about those tests, those trials, and there is a difference in temptations and trials. God doesn't tempt anybody, and go back and listen to his sermon on that. I think it was the first week, so it'd be a couple weeks ago. If you're listening to this in live time, so the first sermon he did on the book of James, he went into great detail about that. But God often does this to see if we love Him. It would have been very easy, and you can go all the way back to the beginning, all the way back to creation. It would have been very easy for God to have created us in such a way that we didn't have the ability to choose. We would instantaneously love Him just because He commanded it, He demanded it, and that's why He did. But that's not true love. Love is sacrificial. Love is making a choice to love, because I don't love because I have to. I love because I choose to. And so even back in Genesis 3, when the fall happened, when sin entered into the picture, when Adam and Eve made the decision to put themselves in a place of God instead of trusting God in the process, God could very well not have allowed that situation to have happened. God could have very well not allowed some of the other situations in the Bible. I was thinking this morning as I was preparing for this, when Jesus go to the end of the book of John, Jesus appears to his disciples there, specifically to Peter. And he asked Peter 3 times, Peter, do you love me? And the the Greek is a different way of asking him every time. It comes across as love every time, but it's really deeper and deeper every time he asks this. And so Peter gets very frustrated with Jesus because, Lord, you know that I love you, even though he just denied him. Even though he told him earlier in the Gospels that I will never forsake you. I will die with you. And Jesus had to tell him, you're going to deny me. You're all going to run away. And we know that that's exactly what happened. And so why does God allow that kind of stuff to happen? Why does God allow our loved ones to go through difficulties? Why do we have to go through pain and suffering and all kinds of stuff? And I'd be sitting here just saying empty words if I said I had all the answers. If I could just give you one answer, it wouldn't encompass all of the truth in that, because we really don't understand on this side of eternity. We don't know on this side of the veil, because a lot of that stuff is hidden from us right now, and one day we'll all understand it. It won't matter to us anymore once we get to heaven and once we get to God. Um, but it's times that we look through this, there that we wonder, why do we have to go through these things? Why do we go through storms? We talk at great length about you're either in a storm, coming out of a storm, or about to approach one. And so the easiest question of that is why? Why we have to keep going through those? Even, it would be one thing if we're being punished. If we did something wrong and God said, I'm going to punish you by making you go through this storm. We look to Jonah. Okay, Jonah gets swallowed by the big fish, the whale, whatever you want to call it, because he was going opposite of God's will. And so we say, okay, it's easy. Avoid mistakes. Avoid behavior that's going to get me in trouble. In raising your kids, be very wary of teaching your kids to avoid bad behavior. Now, it's important to recognize behavior, but it's more important to choose the right thing. I'm trying to say this the right way, because it's going to come out as a double negative. I'm not going to do the wrong thing because I want to avoid punishment. I hope that came across the way I intended it. But I'm going to avoid bad behavior because I don't want to get punished. That is absolutely inaccurate. I want to run to the good behavior. I want to run to God. I'm trying my best to get to God. Of course, Holy Spirit's in me when I accepted Him. But my ultimate goal is not a place, it's not heaven. My ultimate goal is God. And we get that here on earth, but we're also going to get that in the afterlife once we pass on for eternity. So Israel here is going through a series of ups and downs. They're going through a series of difficulties. They're going through a series of positive things. Ultimately, we are heading, just to give you a place where we're at. We're in chapter 17. We're on 17 and 18 today. Chapter 20 is very familiar because that's where we're going to get the Ten Commandments, the basis on which government is run, those 10 Commandments, okay? So we're in 17, 18, 19 will be next, and then 20 is those 10 Commandments. Now, we are in, I got a map. Sorry about that. Let me read, click the wrong button. Let me read for you chapter 17, and then we'll talk about it. Chapter 17, all the congregation of the people of Israel moved on from the wilderness of Sin by stages according to the commandment of the Lord and encamped at Rephidim. But there was, okay, so you have this moving forward. Remember, every time there's a moving forward, but then there's a but. So, but there was no water for the people to drink. And again, we have this thing where we're created by God. We need water. We need food. Those are our two basic forms of need that we have to have. And so the people recognize this. Therefore, the people quarreled with Moses and said, "Give us water to drink." And Moses said, "Why do you quarrel with me? Why do you test the Lord?" But the people thirsted there for water, and the people grumbled against Moses. And here's the same thing you get recurring. They said, "Why did you bring us out of Egypt to kill us and our children and our livestock with thirst?" So again, they're going back. They still got a little bit of Egypt in them. They haven't got all of Egypt out of them. They're still recognizing the fact that we have a problem here, and that memory says we want to go back because at least we had water. Now they're forgetting all the troubles, the beatings, the tortures, and all that stuff that they grumbled against when they were there. It's like us saying, "I remember the good old days. I remember when we could just sit on a porch and not have a care in the world." And we forget all the things we didn't have back then, or all the other problems that we had back then. Whatever back then was. Okay, that's different for everybody. Verse 4. So Moses cried to the Lord, "What shall I do with the people? They are almost ready to stone me." So you have this, you have Moses leading them. You have the people coming to Moses, grumbling, complaining, quarreling is the word that's translated here. It's like they're wanting to fight. Moses recognizes he's calling out to God. He's saying they're almost ready to stone me. So they're almost at the point where they're going to kill me. And the Lord said to Moses, "Pass on before the people, taking with you some of the elders of Israel, and take in your hand the staff which you struck the Nile, and go. Behold, I will stand before you there on the rock at Oreb, and you shall strike the rock, and water shall come out of it, and the people will drink." And Moses did so in the sight of the elders of Israel, and he called the name of the place Massah and Meribah, because of the quarreling of the people of Israel, and because they tested the Lord by saying, "Is the Lord among us or not?" So God, here in this first part, you see God's provision. You see God providing. So every time there's a need here, God, you get in this mindset that God just brought me out here to let me die. Well, no, God brought me out here to provide for me. He didn't just give it to me, he provided, okay? So he provided for them the water that they needed, and they were fine. Now, again, there's always going to bring a second wave of stuff, okay? And so you have the people here. They're provided with what they need. So you say, okay, good times are ahead. We're heading in the right direction. And then you have another problem that's coming up. Then Amalek came and fought with Israel at Rephidim. Now, the indication here is that they were that it was an unprovoked attack by Amalek. No explicit reason is given here because of the attack. It is possible that they heard of how all these things that God did for them in Egypt, how they destroyed Egypt, how God brought them out of the land, how they basically looted Egypt by the people giving them everything they had when they left. Maybe it was maybe the people of Amalek said, "We're not going to let them do this to us. We're going to go out and fight them, so they can't do to us the same thing." Maybe they didn't want to give up their land. Maybe there's a lot of stuff here. Okay, but anyway, there is a fight between the two groups, and interestingly, so there's no indication either of a previous battle or anything that Israel had to actually fight up until this point. There's going to be a lot moving forward, but this is the first time, by all indications, that there is an altercation between Israel and somebody else. So Moses said, verse 9, so Moses said to Joshua, "Choose for us men to go out to fight with Amalek. Tomorrow I will stand at the top of the hill with the staff of God in my hand." So Joshua did just as Moses told him and fought with Amalek. So this is the first time we're introduced to Joshua. Joshua is the right-hand man of Moses. From this point on, we're going to see him a lot. He's going to accompany Moses and be his assistant, be his second in command, and eventually we know that he is going to take over command of Israel and lead them into the land of Canaan, the promised land, after Moses dies, because Moses is not going to be allowed to enter into the promised land. So Joshua here, Joshua was a fighter. Joshua was a warrior. Maybe one day we'll study the book of Joshua, which I think was one of my favorite books to read as far as the tacticalness and the war and all that kind of stuff. And so here Joshua is leading. Okay, so Joshua did as Moses told him and fought with Amalek while Moses, Aaron, and Hur went up to the top of the hill. So Joshua's leading them into this fight. Moses, Aaron, and Hur are up on the top of the hill, most likely just watching. Whenever Moses held up his hand, Israel prevailed, and whenever he lowered his hand, Amalek prevailed. But Moses' hands grew weary, so they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, while Aaron and Hur held up his hands, one on one side and one on the other side. So his hands were steady, were steady until the going down of the sun. And Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and his people with the sword. So picture this battle, that there's a battle between two nations. One nation has not fought before. It is, if you sit and think about it, they were in Egypt for 450 years, and they weren't fighting then. So they may have had individual battles within families, but they weren't a nation until they were in Egypt. They didn't fight Egypt. There was never a battle. There was never a weapon drawn. There was nothing ever done at that point. So this is the first time that this brand new nation, as big as it is, has ever fought. And Joshua has the job to lead them. Now, is there any correlation? And of course, this is rhetorical, between when Moses' hand went up and when it went down. When Moses' hand was held up, Israel was winning the battle. When it lowered, when he got tired, when it lowered, Amalek prevailed. And if you think about it, he held the staff in his hand, which symbolized God's power. It's the same staff that God told him to pick up on that same mountain when he first called him at the burning bush. and he threw it down and it became a snake, and he picked it up and it became a stick again. It's the same staff that he took to Egypt to do the great wonders. Now, there was nothing magical about the stick. Okay, there was nothing supernatural about the piece of wood that he had, other than the fact that it represented God's power. So that stick was a metaphor, or was a symbol of God's power. So anytime God that staff was held up by Moses, God's power was shown. The people of God prevailed. When it fell, it went the other way. And so Aaron and Hur held up Moses' arm so that God's power would prevail. And so eventually Joshua, it says in verse 13, Joshua overwhelmed Amalek and the people with the sword. Verse 14, then the Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book and recite it in the ears of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek under heaven. And Moses built an altar and called the name of it, the Lord is my banner, saying, a hand upon the throne of the Lord. The Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. I've told you in the previous sessions the importance of passing this information down. Now, it's interesting here that the Lord said to recite it in the ears of Joshua. Now, at this point, Joshua is just an assistant. Moses hasn't done anything to anger the Lord to tell him that he's not going to enter into the promised land. That hasn't happened yet. Joshua is just leading, doing what he's supposed to. He has no idea that he is the one that's going to take up the mantle and lead the people into the promised land and become arguably the greatest warrior in the Old Testament, one of at least. But it was important that Moses told this information over and over to Joshua, because Joshua was going to be the one that would take up the mantle. He would take up the leadership and would lead the people. And so when these people, after Moses was gone and there was no more Moses, Joshua was going to be in charge of telling these people over and over. In fact, in Joshua 1, the Lord reminds Joshua that, hey, I'm with you. You have nothing to fear, because I am with you. We're going to go into battle. And they talk about all the time, remember what God did here. Remember what God did there. There's several times in this process where Joshua, and again, I'm tying Exodus into the book of Joshua here, because we're introduced to Joshua. But there's several times that God did these memorial things. Remember when they crossed the Jordan River and they put the 12 stones? There's all these memorable events. We don't do that as much now. The closest thing that we really do is we take pictures, we put them in a photo album, and really we don't do that anymore. Prior to phones and prior to phones, where the phones were a camera, when we had a camera to take a picture, you would take pictures. I can go to my mom and dad's house right now and see all kinds of pictures of me when I was a baby. Now, I don't remember anything about that because I was a baby, I was young, or I was a young child. I don't remember a lot of the Christmases because that was a long time ago. But I do remember, I can look at those pictures and tie those gaps in together and say, hey, I was there. I know I was there. Because our memory, the way we remember things changes. For instance, you can see something happen. It can be something memorable and great. And by the time you start telling the story and other people are telling the story, those details are getting kind of clouded. So you go back and you tell stories. Let me just give you a silly example. I can remember football games that we played in high school. That was 30 some odd years ago, which is crazy to think. Um, and I can remember a few of the details, but when we get together with our football buddies or our teammates, or I'm telling the story, it may have gone from which one night it was pouring down rain so much that you couldn't see across the field, but that story may go to it came a hurricane, or I mean you see where I'm going in this, and before you know it, you just remember the outcome. You don't remember the details. Now, the outcome is important, but the details are also important about how you got there, about what exactly God did. We don't just say David killed Goliath. Now, that's an important thing to remember. David did kill Goliath. But how did David kill Goliath? He picked up 3 stones and a slingshot and only had to use one of them. And that story gets a lot more powerful the more details you have. And so that is why God is telling Moses here to write this as a memorial in the book. Tell it to people. Tell it to the people. Recite it in the ears of Joshua, so they'll remember. And he built an altar there, saying, "The Lord is my banner." That is again another way for us to remember that God is our God. We come together weekly to worship God about all He's done for us. We hear the word preached, and it's not just for our practicality, which is and the application, but it's also to remember these things. Remember about what He's done. He instituted the Lord's Supper. What did He say? In remembrance of me, do these things. We don't just come together however often that your church does it, once, twice a year, once a month, once a quarter, whatever, it doesn't matter. He just says, as often as you do it, do this in remembrance of me. Remember what Jesus did. Remember that Jesus died, his blood, his body. And that's why it's so important to remember these things. So we see the provision, we see the protection, but we're also going to see the power of the protection of the leader here. We're going to get a visit by Jethro, and we haven't seen or heard from Jethro in several chapters now, because when Moses left to go back to Egypt many chapters ago, he sent his wife and his sons back to Jethro. Jethro, the priest of Midian, Moses' father-in-law, heard all that God had done for Moses and for his people, how the Lord had brought Israel out of Egypt. Now Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, had taken Zipporah, Moses' wife, and had sent her home, along with her 2 sons. The name of the one was Gershom, for he said, I have been a sojourner in a foreign land. And the name of the other, Eleazar, for he said, the Lord of my father was my help and delivered me from the sword of Pharaoh. Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, came with his sons and his wife to Moses in the wilderness, where he encamped at the mountain of God. That mountain of God is Mount Oreb, Mount Sinai. It's also called Mount Sinai. And when he sent word to Moses, I, your father-in-law, Jethro, am coming to you with your wife and your 2 sons with her. Moses went out to meet his father-in-law and bowed down and kissed him. And they asked each other of their welfare and went into the tent. Then Moses told his father-in-law and all that the Lord had done to Pharaoh and to the Egyptians for Israel's sake, and the hardships that had come upon them in the way, and how the Lord had delivered them. And Jethro rejoiced all the good that the Lord had done to Israel, in that he had delivered them out of the hands of the Egyptians. Jethro said, "Blessed be your Lord, who has delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians, and out of the hand of Pharaoh, and has delivered the people from under the hand of the Egyptians. Now I know that the Lord is greater than all gods, because in this affair they dealt arrogantly with the people." And Jethro, Moses' father-in-law, brought a burnt offering and sacrifices to God. And Aaron came with all the elders to Israel to eat the bread which Moses' father-in-law before God. So you have this, excuse me, this family reunion. Moses hasn't seen his father-in-law, nor his family, his wife, and his children in several years now. So they are a great time. I'm not exactly sure. We're not told exactly how long it was. So Moses tells the story to Jethro about all that God had done. And so you see this passing of information, all that God has done. To God be all the glory in this. And you ask, why did God allow all this stuff to happen? Well, the story is starting to pass. It's starting to spread. Jethro has already heard the stories about what God had done through Moses, and now he's ultimately coming to Moses to hear it from Moses himself. Information was passed a great deal differently back then it was now. There was no texting, there's no emails, there's no phone calls. It was by word of mouth that you had this information passed. And so Jethro wanted to hear for himself exactly what God had done. And so he's coming to the source. He's coming to Moses, and he's hearing everything that God was doing with them. The next day Moses set to judge the people, and the people stood around Moses from morning till evening. When Moses' father-in-law saw that all he was doing for the people, he said, "What is this that you are doing? And all the people stand around you from morning till evening." And Moses said to his father-in-law, "Because the people came to me to inquire of God. When they have a dispute, they come to me, and I decide between one person and another, and I will make them know the statutes of God and his laws." Moses' father-in-law said to him, "What you are doing is not good. You and the people with you will certainly wear yourself out, for the thing is too heavy for you. You are not able to do it alone. Now obey my voice, and I will give you advice, and God be with you. You shall represent the people before God and bring the cases to God. You shall warn them about the statutes and laws and make them know the way in which they walk and what they must do. Moreover, look for able men from all the people, men who fear God, who are trustworthy and hate a bribe, and place such a thing over the people and chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, or fifties, and tens. And let them judge the people at all times. And every great matter they bring to you, but every small matter they decide themselves. So it will be easier for you, and they will bear the burden with you. If you do this, God will direct you, and you will be able to endure. All of the people also will go in their place in peace." So Moses listened to the voice of his father-in-law and did all that he said. Moses chose able men out of Israel and made them heads over the people, chiefs of thousands, of hundreds, of fifties, and of tens, and they judged the people at all times. Any hard case brought to Moses, any small matter they decided themselves. Then Moses left his father-in-law to depart, and he went away to his own country. The point of this is to say we can't do this by ourselves. Even the greatest leaders in the world can't handle all this himself. Jethro recognized that Moses was wearing himself out by listening, by trying to be the only one that could do this. Jethro recognized that, Yes, there are times where you need to be the one. Moses, in those serious cases, you need to be the one. You need the one to take charge. But there's other small matters that you can train these other people. You can teach them the statutes of God, and they can decide between themselves those small things so you're not wearing yourself thin. We have leaders, we have leaders in our church, we have pastors, we have leaders in other organizations that are wearing themselves out because they're doing the job that they should be training others to do. And that is a very important principle here that Jethro is teaching to Moses and allowed him many more years of his life to live because he was at a point that he was wearing himself out. Um, Burnout is a real thing. Okay. Um, Burnout leads to isolation, which leads to depression. And those things can happen very quickly. And so, if you find yourself in this type of situation, if you find yourself saying things like, "Nobody cares about what I'm doing. Nobody will help me," and again, I recognize that number one, I'm guilty of this. I'd rather sometimes just do it myself than have to deal with the hassle of trying to teach somebody else, the hassle of trying to get you motivated in which you want to do something. But the truth is, in my own case, I'm not going to be here for forever. I plan on being here for a long time, but I'm not. I'm flesh. I'm going to eventually die. And so what that means is that my job is not to simply do a task. My job is to teach you how to do that so that you can replace me. There is this theory of replacementism, and I just made up another word there, and that's our job. We are our job is to train our own replacements so that when we do leave, it will be a seamless transition. Again, it hurts our feelings sometimes when we think somebody else can do my job. I'm not as important as I thought I was. And oftentimes we are the only ones that know how to, or the only ones that do things is because we're the only ones that ever do it. We never ask. We we never spend time discipling others to do the same thing. And that's a very dangerous part in the church because you often and sometimes in some serious cases have people that are trying to be the only ones that are able to do it. And that's good for job security, but it's bad for business because that's not what we're not in the business of simply getting things done. We're in the business of relationships with people and our God, most importantly. And so Moses is taught a very serious lesson here, which he will install throughout the upcoming years of Israel. There's not going to be just one person. There's not going. They were never designed to have an earthly king, and of course we know that bad things happen in the book of Judges when they start asking for a king, and for Samuel when they start asking for a king. And of course, there's hundreds of years of evil that occurs because of that. But we're designed to do it together. Now, somebody has to take the lead and somebody has to facilitate it. But there's a difference in facilitating and leading. Leading tends to be directed toward one person in charge and one person driving the boat or driving the vehicle or whatever. Whereas facilitating is I'm leading, but I'm bringing you with me, and I'm allowing you to become a part of that. And that is a precursor to true discipleship. True discipleship is when I'm not worried. Yes, I have something to do. I have a task to do. And yes, I'm worried about getting it done, but I'm more concerned about your relationship with me as I try to teach you and disciple you into doing this. And there's a big difference in that. So that's the story of Moses and Jethro. Soon after that, Jethro goes back home. We don't hear from him ever again. The journey continues, and we move forward. Okay, so everything in this process is about moving forward. We don't turn and go back, even though the people were grumbling. We are laser focused on the goal at hand, and this goal is going to the land of Canaan, which is the promised land which God promised Abraham way back in Genesis 15. So that's it for today. Let me pray for us, and we will see you next time. God, thank you for this day and all that you've done. I pray that you will be honored and glorified in everything that's said and done, and I pray that you would receive that glory and praise. We thank you for your word, and we give you the glory in Christ's name. Amen.